Hey everybody, it's Randall. So tonight we're going to talk about Brett Kavanaugh and the New York Times fiasco. But before we do that, we're talking about the movie All the President's Men. There's a very key scene that takes place in the parking garage between Woodward and Deep Throat. Now, just to set the scene up, Woodward and Bernstein thought that they had this huge break in the case, that they really had Nixon. But it turns out the individual they spoke to, apparently there was a miscommunication, and the information they thought was good was actually faulty. And when Woodward meets up with Deep Throat in the parking garage, Deep Throat just lays into him. Said, if you aim too high, you're going to get people having sympathy for Richard Nixon, which he didn't think was possible. And it looked like the whole ability to unravel Watergate and expose the corruption to the general public was going to go away. But they persevered. They got over this mistake, and they managed to find what they needed, uncover the evidence, and as we all know, Richard Nixon, the Republican, was the first and only president ever forced to resign. Now you're asking yourself, Randall, what does that have to do with the here and now? What does that have to do with the New York Times and Brett Kavanaugh? It actually has everything to do with the New York Times and Brett Kavanaugh. The New York Times ran an opinion piece, or a piece in their opinion section, and in it, it laid the workings of there was a woman at a party, and Brett Kavanaugh stuck his penis in her hand. Only problem is that the woman in question was in no way, ever, shape, or form contacted for this book, contacted for this op ed, and it blew up in the New York Times face. They aimed and they missed. And what that gave Donald Trump was the ability to go onto Twitter and say, hey, ha ha, I showed you guys, I told you, it's the deep state. It's the lamestream media and the Democrats trying to take down Brett Kavanaugh. It's a deep state conspiracy. People that claimed about deep states, they used to be fodder for TV shows and movies. They were these people, these lunatics on the outskirts of sanity. The tinfoil hats, just every crazy conspiracy you can imagine they subscribed to because they believed in this thing called the deep state. And where that brings us today is now Donald Trump has got his followers, his believers, his people behind him thinking that, yeah, there is a deep state. It is trying to take out Brett Kavanaugh. It's the liberals, man, teaming up with the lamestream media. See, if anything, the New York Times fiasco was actually kind of a win for us. And I know that sounds weird for me to say because it gave Donald Trump the ammunition to go onto Twitter and try to prove that he was right the whole time. But now we know something that we should have known before. If we're going to aim, make sure the ducks are in a row. Make sure we got our facts straight. Make sure we know what we're talking about. Because if we aim and we miss, we're going to turn public opinion in favor of Donald Trump. We're going to make it look like we're a bunch of crazies trying to take him down. So what we need to do is we need to learn from what happened this weekend with the New York Times. Every journalist, every vlogger like myself, everybody on Twitter, and everybody in the print media and the television media and like the Young Turks, the internet media. Got to make sure the ducks are in a row. We can't do things as haphazard as the New York Times did. We need to learn from their mistake. And it was a huge mistake. It was a huge mistake, but it's a mistake we can recover from. It's a mistake we can recover from. If we're going to take this country back and we're going to instill sanity back into this country, it's a mistake we can overcome. And it's also something we should heed going forward. Like I said, everybody needs to look at this past weekend with the New York Times fiasco as not a loss. It's not a way to give Donald Trump all the fodder he needs to go out and tweet his theories about the conspiracies of the deep state. We need to look at this exactly as what it is, a learning lesson. What we do with that lesson is up to us. That's it. Have a good night and a better tomorrow.